High up in the Swiss mountains, fed by glacial ice and eternal snow, lies the source of Europe's busiest river, the Rhine. Hundreds of meltwater streams unite and gush into the valley. Today, there are not many places left where it's permitted to flow freely. The mighty river rushes impetuously down to Lake Constance, straightened and tamed, but undefeated. The St. Gotthard Massif in the heart of Switzerland is where the Alpine watershed divides north and south. The North Sea and the Mediterranean. It's the source of mighty rivers, among them the Rhine. A lighthouse high up on the Oberalp Pass marks the beginning of the Rhine's 1,200-kilometer journey. Lake Thoma is regarded as the source of the anterior Rhine. The Rhine defines the lives of many people, providing them with water and energy, a source of life. Water as a precious resource is the passionate interest of Swiss swimmer Ernst Brommeis. Ernst has already swum 200 mountain lakes for his project Miracle Blue.
I've always felt at home in these mountain lakes. If I'm passionate about something, I don't take it for granted, and I really appreciate it. So now I'm trying to pass on my passion for these mountain lakes, in the hope that other people will also see the beauty of them and appreciate how beautiful this water is.
The self-proclaimed water ambassador Ernst Brommeis tries to raise awareness that water is a finite resource.
I feel very lucky and privileged that we can live here in the Alps with the water simply pouring down like a waterfall. We get the impression it will last forever. But this privilege also entails a responsibility to look after this water. Anything we do at the source will have an effect further downriver. So it's important not to disrupt the natural cycle. I consider water to be a basic human right. It's incredible to think that we live in such affluence here, while a part of the world population lacks this prosperity. It's this inequality I want to address and discuss.
Ernst combines his mission with competitive ambitions. In May 2012, he set out on an adventure to swim from the source of the Rhine to the North Sea estuary in Rotterdam.
I've always worked with the Rhine. I mean, you don't stand a chance against it. The water is simply stronger, but it was a battle against myself. Swimming across Lake Constance right at the beginning, I realized it's impossible. I'm not going to make it in the time we calculated, but I didn't blame the Rhine. I never cursed it, because after all, I depend on it.
Ernst Brommeis' passion and fascination with the Rhine remains undaunted.
I want to swim the Rhine again. The Rhine simply sums up how people use water and how they're dependent on it. Whether it's Lake Constance as a supply of drinking water or the Rhine as a gigantic waterway, the disparity between the source in the Alps and Rotterdam, being the second largest port in the world, that's what I find fascinating.
When Ernst will attempt to swim the Rhine again remains his secret. The mighty river and its source will never release their grip on him. Beyond Lake Thoma, the Rhine plunges down dramatically. It rapidly becomes a wild mountain torrent. But only 2 kilometers further on, the anterior Rhine is harnessed for the first time. Once the force of the Rhine was feared. Today it's a source of energy, indispensable for modern life. Further up the valley, Disentis Abbey towers high above the river. The huge Benedictine monastery attests to the significance of the trade route that once led from the anterior Rhine valley to the southern edge of the Alps.
In Disentis, the Rhine is taken for granted. You may not see it, but you're always aware it's down there.
Abbot Daniel Schönbächler has been a member of Disentis Abbey for over 50 years. For the past 12 years, he's overseen the running of the monastery. Now he has handed over his duties to a younger member. He finally has time for other missions. He works as a theological, psychological minister. Businessmen and women visit his seminars. Top athletes consult him. In his work, the Rhine plays an important symbolic role.
The Rhine's source is up at Lake Thoma, and it's the river's nature to flow downwards. It never flows up. And that's perfectly all right. It's as it should be. It's a bit like human nature.
Abbot Daniel not only gives psychological advice, he also sees people with health problems.
It's part of human nature that energy circulates inside us. It's our vital force. As long as it flows, everything is all right. But if it is blocked, there are going to be problems, and it has to be set in motion again.
The fountain in front of Son Benedet's chapel was designed by star architect Peter Zumthor. It symbolizes the course of the Rhine and the human life cycle. For Abbot Daniel, the chapel is a place of contemplation. He sees his beliefs and his work as being in complete harmony.
Spirituality isn't wellness. Spirituality means honoring the word of God, which he uttered when he gave me life. Am I truly who I am, or who I should be? If something is blocked within me, it comes from the mind. And this needs to be solved so that I can redeem who I really am. That's how I see my spiritual work.
Abbot Daniel wants to help people in their spiritual development. He accepts that the Alpine Rhine is constantly being channeled as necessary protection against the water. But regulation comes at a price, that of freedom.
When the Rhine isn't able to flow anymore, there's tension and restraint. It's the same with humans. When I'm forced to do something, I waste energy that could be used for a better purpose. If I'm allowed to do something, that's freedom. Then I do things if they make sense to me, and if not, it's not the end of the world. That's incredible freedom.
The anterior Rhine impressively shows what it's capable of some 30 kilometers down the valley. The Rhine Canyon, known as Ruin Alta. It was created by a rock slide almost 10,000 years ago. Thousands of cubic meters of rock broke off and hurtled down into the valley. Ruin Alta is a Rito-Romanic word meaning high-piled rubble. In fact, the piles of rocks that cascaded into the anterior Rhine Valley were around 10 times the volume of the Matterhorn, one of the highest peaks in the Alps. Over thousands of years, the anterior Rhine etched a 400-meter deep channel into the rock, creating a canyon of rare beauty. It's a popular location for canyoning and rafting. In good weather, both are tremendous fun, though dangerous. The Rhine Railway built a bridge across the canyon a century ago. It is one of its most spectacular legs, but also one that requires precise monitoring.
The Rhine Alta is a unique place. And you need to keep a watchful eye out for the water, rock slides or landslides.
Bruno Kadosh has worked for the Rhine Railways for the past 50 years. A true railwayman at heart, he's responsible for the track between Disentis and Chur, which runs straight through the Rhine Alta. Even today, he's full of admiration for the engineers and construction workers' achievements when the railway was built.
It's amazing that the Rhaetian Railway was built through this canyon 100 years ago. They didn't have our means of building the railway, and the constructions they made are unbelievably impressive. Tunnels, walls, drainage systems, even bridges. But some people did lose their lives.
Maintaining the route is a laborious task. Challenging work for Kadosh and his team. Rockfall, rain and the Rhine itself take their toll along the route. The most vulnerable point is where the Carrera stream flows into the Rhine. Whenever there is a thunderstorm in the mountains or the Rhine's water rises, there's a risk that the track will be completely washed out within half an hour. This seemingly harmless little stream is rather unpredictable. Within minutes, it can swell up into a mighty river, tearing masses of debris and rubble with it into the gorge.
You can almost smell it coming when the Carrera stream is gathering debris. And you can hear the large stones rolling in the water. Someone who's not familiar with it might notice something odd, but they won't know what's happening or where it's coming from.
The newly inaugurated bridge, here across the Carrera, is already the third. This one should be able to withstand the stream's force. In addition, the tracks are constantly being monitored to ensure the safety of the passengers. Bruno has been doing this job for many years, and he will soon retire. He will miss the railway, but the river will remain in his heart.
The Rhine really means a lot to me, especially the anterior Rhine, which is part of this valley landscape. There's no need to be afraid, but you should show it respect.
Deep in the forest, in a dip between Flims Mountain and the Rhine Canyon, lies Lake Kalma, a turquoise pearl with no visible tributaries. a tranquil paradise, which is no surprise. Laida Kalma means Lake of Midday Rest. "76 kilometers further on, near Reichenau, the grey waters of the anterior Rhine mix, almost reluctantly, with those of the posterior Rhine. The two furious mountain streams will later become one of the mightiest rivers in Europe. The source of the posterior Rhine is some 70 kilometers up the valley at the eastern foot of the Ticino's highest mountain, the Rheinwaldhorn. This is the European watershed, where the water will either flow south or north via the posterior Rhine. Fed by eternal snow and glacial ice, numerous brooks and streamlets come together here and pour into the posterior Rhine valley from all sides. Val Corciusa is a natural secondary valley, only accessible by foot, an untouched gem. For many years, Corciusa Alp has been farmed by the Hebling family in summer. Over 2,000 animals spend the summer months up here on the mountain pastures: sheep, cows, and horses. Once in a while, all of the pastures need to be grazed. Often, animals are brought up here from the lowlands that have never been on a mountain pasture before. They require special attention as they're not used to the terrain. Laura Helbling lures the animals onto a field with salt. She's an experienced shepherdess. She's been coming to the pastures in Val Corciusa every summer since she was a child.
My father started going to the pastures when I was 10, and my brothers and sisters and I would look after the sheep and cows. Now it's actually my summer job, and I really enjoy it. It makes a nice change from school or studying. Up here I can simply enjoy the work and switch off.
21-year-old Laura is a qualified chemist and is now studying to become a nutritionist. For her, the tough summer on the pastures is a way of recovering from city life.
I
like being outdoors and being on the move all day. I like the fact that I don't have to go to the gym or anything, because I get enough exercise doing this work. I personally couldn't work in the stables. It's too cramped. Out here, the animals are free and can roam all day long. I just have to make sure that they don't stray off the meadow.
The valley is around 9 kilometers long. Consequently, the shepherds can't be with their herds all the time.
It is important to sit down sometimes and just watch the animals as they establish their own hierarchy. Then you understand how they graze and when they will move on to another place.
Summer on the mountain pastures can be a solitary affair. The only regular communication is with other shepherds. There's no mobile reception up here, and Laura is delighted when her father and brother come to visit.
I like working so closely together with them, being able to discuss things. For me, the team is very important on the mountain pastures. That's why I like being up here with my family.
The most important subject is always the weather.
When I'm outside, I sometimes get scared, especially when I'm very high up and the sky suddenly goes really dark. Then I know that I have to get down into the valley quickly.
Lightning isn't the only danger. Heavy rainfall can be particularly risky. Too much rain is always dangerous, but water is vital to these pastures.
Up here, water is very important. In good weather, we appreciate the water because we need it to drink, and the animals do too. I always look for a stream where I can fill my bottle. On the other hand, when it rains heavily, then the rivers swell and they become difficult to cross. But when the mountain lakes heat up, that's when I like the water.
That at some stage the water of the mountain lakes will meet the Rhine and flow into the North Sea seems theoretical up here.
When you see those small streams trickling down from the glaciers, it is hard to imagine what a mass of water will come together further down. It's really incredible.
The fact that the Ariua brook flows into the posterior Rhine undisturbed isn't as natural as it seems. Plans to dam the rear valley and use water power to generate electricity were only abandoned in 1999 after a long struggle. It's a different story in nearby Val di Lei. The dam wall from the 1950s is considered a feat of architecture and diplomacy. Whilst the lake lies almost completely on Italian territory, the wall belongs to Switzerland. The Reno di Lei also runs off into Switzerland. The water from the Lago di Lei is the only water in Italy to flow through the pristine Aversa Valley via the anterior Rhine and into the North Sea. Back in the valley of the Rhine forest, here, almost 2,000 years ago, one of the most important trade routes crossed the Alps. Even today, the A13 over the San Bernardino Pass is an important connection between north and south, used by thousands of tourists each summer. Today, the road over the pass is a thrilling challenge for drivers who enjoy hairpin bends. For hundreds of years before the modern road was built, it was an important trade route for the Romans between northern and southern Europe. About 10 kilometers further down the posterior Rhine lies the village of Sprue. For centuries, its location at the foot of the Sprue Pass made it an important trading hub. The glorious Walser houses in the village are emblematic of the history of transalpine travel. The posterior Rhine region is shaped by majestic mountains, a barren landscape with numerous lakes and streams. Like an image of both poles of the Alpine Rhine, the pristine Lake d'Arfons and the anterior Rhine, dammed in Lake Zufner, lie almost next to each other, some 600 meters in altitude apart. Lake Zufner leaves the lower Rhine through a retaining dam. One weir further down, beautiful Val Schorns appears with its lush fields and prosperous villages. This is where Jonas Baumann does his training.
I've always enjoyed competitive sports. As a small boy, I was always the one who was running around. It's great that I could turn my hobby into a profession.
Jonas has been on the Swiss national cross-country skiing team for 5 years, and many have high hopes for him. He grew up high above the Posterior Rhine. He's the only son of a farming family, but his passion is sport, not agriculture. Training on these childhood routes brings back memories.
After school, we'd go swimming in the freezing water. But when there's a storm, the water has an incredible force. That's when you'd know that it's not safe to go in. You can easily see from the bridge how powerful the water is. When it carries large stones or logs, it's quite impressive.
Further remarkable evidence of the force the anterior Rhine has gained at this early stage appears a few hundred meters downriver. The famous Via Mala Gorge. Via Mala means bad path. Long ago, the Romans hacked a dizzying and dangerous path through the gorge. Today, it's a tourist attraction. People come to admire how the untamed Posterior Rhine has cut a 300-meter deep path through the rocks. Today, the Transvia Mala Run leads through the gorge, an incredibly difficult mountain jog, which is the highlight of the year for many athletes. In 2010, Jonas competed too.
The course takes you right through the Via Mala Gorge with the many steps and narrow paths through the forest, all along the riverbank. It's a 19-kilometer route, and you have to overcome 1,000 meters in altitude. For me as a local, of course, it was the greatest feeling to win the race in this countryside.
As a professional sportsman, training is a daily obligation, but it's one he enjoys.
Training is often exhausting, but I know what a privilege it is to be outdoors every day, enjoying nature and seeing things other people will never see.
Jonas feels a special connection with the Rhine.
The water has a very calming effect on me, and it gives me new energy to get me through a tough training program.
Moreover, Jonas sees similarities between the Rhine and himself.
The river starts off very small and then gets bigger and bigger. It's the same as in an athlete's life. You start at the bottom and then slowly try to work your way to the top. That requires a lot of stamina. And it's the same for the Rhine, which has to cross gorges and narrow passes. In sport, stamina's also one of the most important characteristics you need.
There's not much flat land in terrain like this. Every last corner is used as grazing pasture. High above the southern edge of Via Mala Gorge, Hohenrätien Castle towers over the village of Thusis, where the Posterior Rhine meets its most powerful tributary, the Albula. From the depth of the Bündner Mountains, the water rushes down the valley. The river became world famous due to the viaduct on the Albula route of the Rhine Railway, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Rhine and its tributaries continue to challenge people to ever new gigantic constructions to help them cross the mighty river. They mark the course of the Alpine Rhine. Exceptional architecture of a very different kind can be seen in Thusis. As early as the 19th century, the Posterior Rhine was straightened here to gain arable land. The valley is of strategic importance. It connects three important alpine passes. Hence, it became one of the regions with the most castles in all of Switzerland. Ortenstein Castle towers high up over the Posterior Rhine. The mansion and its grounds are still inhabited and cultivated today. Amongst other things, rare varieties of apple are grown here. The only time the river flows along its natural bed is just before the anterior and posterior Rhine meet. Meandering peacefully through the valley, it shows a completely different face. Just beyond Reichenau. From here, the Rhine is simply called the Rhine. The power plant at Donau-Ems proved an unscalable barrier for fish from Lake Constance on the way to their habitual spawning grounds. By the end of the 70s, the Lake Constance trout was on the brink of extinction. It's partly thanks to Florian Bebby that the species survived.
I've been a fisheries warden for almost 24 years now, and you do get attached to fish. Of course, they're mute animals, but somehow we give them a voice by protecting them.
Florian Bebby. The canton and the environmentalists battled hard for a fish ladder, costing well over $6 million. It was the only way to ensure the long-term survival of the lake's trout.
The fish are determined to get to the spawning grounds where they grew up. And that's why we looked for a way to lead them back there with no assistance from outside.
It was a rocky road to success. The breeding program began in 1983 with only 4 females and 1 male. Today there is again a healthy population of Lake Constance trout. And, thanks to the fish ladder, the animals can now return to their spawning grounds. Florian no longer needs to breed the fish, but he comes here regularly to examine their size. And he monitors how many of them have managed the long journey all the way from Lake Constance.
Today there are again many brown trout. Every year there are about 500, 600, 700. When you think that before there were none. So this was perhaps the last chance. And now we will have to see how stable the population is.
One way Florian Bebby determines the number of fish is with a motion sensor camera, which takes a photo whenever a fish passes through the fish ladder. On one of these pictures, Bebby made an unusual discovery. Apparently, he's not the only one who's happy about the return of the Lake Constance trout.
It was quite a sensation. when we looked at these pictures and discovered the European otter, which was thought to be extinct in Switzerland. For about 3 months, he appeared regularly in the pictures. It would be nice to have him here again, even if it means that he would take some of the fish. Nature would once more be intact. And that is what we humans should be aiming for.
Florian isn't a man of many words. But where his fish are concerned, his feelings for the animals and the Rhine are evident.
For me, the river's a bit like a friend. I grew up by the Rhine, and without it, something would be missing. When it floods, you shouldn't get too close. It's a bit like with people. When they're in a bad mood, you should leave them alone. It's the same with the Rhine.
The by now rather impressive Alpine Rhine flows, unspoilt for a short stretch, to Donau-Ems towards the city of Chur. Callander Mountain rises up high above the valley. Lush alpine pastures with an almost Mediterranean climate and steep rock faces are typical of Chur's nearby mountain. Chur is one of the oldest towns in Switzerland. It's the capital of the canton of Graubünden, with its splendid bishop's residence and beautiful historic district. The world-famous village of Mayenfeld. It may have been alpine pastures like these that inspired Johanna Spyri in her description of the grandfather's hut in her famous novel Heidi. In the upper Rhine Valley, the Rhine holds its northerly course for many kilometers. Soon it will become a river frontier for the first time. The listed old wooden bridge, which was built in 1870, connects Switzerland with Liechtenstein. It's one of a number of bridges that not only cross the Rhine, but also national borders. Overlooking Vaduz, the capital of Liechtenstein, is the castle of the ruling family, one of the oldest in Europe. Vaduz Castle is not only home to the family, but also to the head of state. Liechtenstein is a hereditary constitutional monarchy, and the country is governed by the prince as well as by parliament. A few kilometers further north, the mighty but now regulated Alpine Rhine is joined by the river Ill from the Vorarlberg Alps. The Rhine now forms the boundary between Austria and Switzerland. Numerous border crossings along the lower Rhine bear memory to the centuries when travelling within Europe wasn't that easy. The old and new Rhine at Diepholzau. The old course of the river is still clearly visible. Since the Rhine was regulated in around 1900 and 1920, its old branches and wetlands have become popular bathing areas. The new Rhine flows towards Lake Constance as straight as a die. With its regulation, the valley dwellers' ancient wish came true. The river was tamed and land was gained for agriculture and settlements. But due to the increasing speed of the straightened Rhine, The sediment and debris the river has carried for nearly 90 kilometers on its journey from the Alps can no longer be deposited. The artificial riverbed constantly needs dredging to prevent the Rhine from spilling over the dikes. A positive side effect, the gravel which the river has ground and carried along with it is a source of money. For almost 5 kilometers, the Rhine is directed into a deep part of Lake Constance. You can clearly see how the Alpine Rhine, with its sand, gravel and pebbles, pours into the lake. The Rhine is extended in order to prevent the bays of the Rhine Delta from silting up. For the people, the extension of the Rhine has become a popular bathing beach. For the wildlife of the original Rhine Delta, the extension meant the loss of a natural habitat. Today, the whole area, the extension and the old delta, has become a nature sanctuary. For biologist Agnes Steininger, a wonderful place to work.
It's definitely not an advantage for nature. At the time it was a matter of we want more security. Nowadays we look at many areas and think what we could do to give something back to nature.
Along the Rhine extension, Agnes Steininger is in search of plants. New life has settled here. Even before it was extended, the Rhine Delta was a paradise for birds.
We were lucky that the area was preserved and that people realized how special it is. It's a resting place for birds, and luckily the local people understood this very quickly. That way protective measures were introduced at an early stage.
Whenever possible, she grabs her binoculars and observes the new arrivals.
The cormorant has a rather difficult story, because it has currently been the subject of much debate in the area. I can understand why. The fishermen are trying to make a living, but the cormorants are also there feeding on fish. On the other hand, they're such graceful birds, and when you see flocks of them, it's very impressive. They also go sunbathing, and it's really nice when you think that the people on the opposite bank of the river are doing exactly the same thing.
The Austrian Rhine Delta may be particularly known for the variety of bird species that breed and rest here, but it has a lot more to offer.
It is quite wonderful that we have the Rhine that actually shaped the entire landscape and created so many different habitats. It's due to this diversity that there are so many plants and animals around. And that just makes it so beautiful.
A notable addition to this paradise is the beaver. In Little Beaver Venice, as Agnes affectionately calls the marshland forest, she sets off on a search.
Even if you don't actually see the animal, its traces are obvious. It's quite exciting, like solving a mystery. There are bite marks on that tree trunk. Where else could he have been? And the more you discover and the more beaver lodges you find, the more it becomes obvious. The beavers live and breed here. They feel at home with us, and that's great.
Agnes particularly enjoys sharing her enthusiasm about the Rhine Delta and all its plants and animals with the next generation.
I think it's very important to show children what we've got right on our doorstep. Often it's just a matter of taking a closer look and then you can discover all sorts of things. It's nice to see how fascinated the kids are and how much they enjoy it. It makes you realize the importance of these areas remaining intact. After all, they will be the ones protecting them after us.
In the distant future, the Alpine Rhine may completely fill up Lake Constance. Until then, it remains a beautiful cultural landscape. Every year at the Bregenz Festival, a new impressive set is erected on the world's largest floating stage. Near Lindau on the German shore, the Rhine returns to the surface. After the estuary, the cold Rhine water disappears in a subterranean waterfall into the depths of the lake. From here, it follows the banks of Lake Constance towards Untersee, the lower lake. Numerous ferry routes connect the German and Swiss shores. Lake Constance, its people and its shores, a place to celebrate the most beautiful aspects of life. Some regions of Lake Constance were settled almost 6,000 years ago. The Stilthouse Museum in Unterruldingen has a reconstruction of pile dwellings as they may have looked thousands of years ago. According to estimates, some of these villages may have had up to 1,000 inhabitants. Only a few kilometers further up the lake, in Zipplingen at Überlinger See, archaeology student Melanie Jannik presents her findings from Lake Constance.
It's a great insight into another small world, or actually another large world, and that's really fascinating. It's great fun.
Every year in spring, Melanie is part of a crew that goes on diving digs in the pile dwellings of Zipplingen. These settlements are registered UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Humans settled around the bay at Zipplingen around 3,900 BC. There are traces of as many as 17 settlements there, the last surviving until 900 BC.
It's really like plunging into a different time. I work my way down through the different layers, and as each layer represents a different era, I go further and further back in time.
The finds are carefully marked and catalogued. In Lake Constance, the conditions for archaeological digs are unique, as the objects are preserved particularly well in the water under the sediments. Under layers of sediment, they're cut off from oxygen. Organic matter hardly decays.
Once we found a 5,000-year-old hazelnut, and it looked as if it had dropped in there yesterday.
The findings give an indication of the lake dwellers' lives. Even disasters like fires can be traced by looking at the soil. The objects found make it possible to understand the lives of the settlers.
When I take a find out of our site in Lake Constance, I hold it in my hand and I know no human has held this object in their hand for 5,000 years. And that's so amazing.
Schick, oder?
An axe like this is, of course, also incredible, particularly because axes are so beautifully designed, and some are still very sharp. It's amazing. I'm happy with every find, whether it's ceramics or bones or textiles. I'm happy about everything.
Despite the underwater archaeologists' work and their conclusions, we will never know exactly what life was like for the early settlers. The museum in Unterruldingen can only give a rough idea of the everyday lives of the people back then. Melanie is aware of that, but mosquitoes and the constant danger of fire and flood must have made life extremely difficult.
It's easy to romanticize, but under the prevailing conditions in those days, life was much harder. It couldn't be planned, and it was nearly impossible to predict anything. I definitely have a lot of respect for the people back then.
That's why Melanie Yannick will be back in Zipplingen again next year to dive into the distant past. The Rhine only partially mixes with the lake water and stays mainly along the German shore. The main current is absorbed by the Constance hopper. The kilometre count begins in the middle of the old Rhine bridge in Constance. Another 1,033 kilometres left to go to the Dutch city of Rotterdam, before the Rhine finally disappears into the North Sea.